They say if you keep your head down and work hard, someone will eventually notice. I believed that. For 4 years, I gave everything I had to my job. Late nights, weekends, skipped vacations. I built our company's entire data infrastructure from the ground up. When I joined, we were just 10 people cramped in a dusty office with a broken coffee machine. Now we were over 200 employees strong, with 2 floors, a glass conference room, and investors calling us the next big thing. I wasn't the type who craved attention. I didn't speak up in meetings unless I had to. I wasn't close with the execs. My world revolved around dashboards, SQL queries, automation scripts, and making sure our data made sense. Because in this company, without good data, nothing worked. They used to call me the invisible engine. I didn't mind. I liked being behind the curtain, making sure everything ran smoothly. But over time, I started to notice something. The new hires, mostly men, loud, confident, smooth with leadership, got promotions within months. One even got a raise after presenting a PowerPoint I helped him design. Meanwhile, I stayed at the same salary I had when I joined. No bonuses. No stock refresh. Just the same polite email from HR every year saying, "Budget constraints. You're doing great. Maybe next time." Maybe next time. I told myself to be patient. That recognition would come. That my work spoke for itself. But when I saw Alex, someone I trained, get promoted to head of data strategy while I was still listed as senior analyst, something cracked. So I decided to speak up. I spent a week preparing a detailed performance report. I listed every project I led, every cost-saving initiative I implemented, every investor deck that used my numbers. I ran the math. My work had directly contributed to over $1.2 million in retained revenue. I double-checked the graphs, polished the charts, practiced what I'd say. When the quarterly review meeting invitation came through, just me and Grant, our CEO, I thought, this is it. This is when it changes. Grant was known for being charming in public and ruthless in private. Still, I believed that if I came prepared, if I presented facts, he'd listen. After all, this company was built on data, and I was the one who kept that data clean, structured, and actionable. The day of the meeting, I wore my best blazer and carried a folder with my report. As I walked into his office, he smiled and gestured for me to sit. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said. That gave me hope. But then he leaned back in his chair, looked me dead in the eye, and asked, "Do you really think you deserve a higher salary?" I froze. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I didn't expect him to ask the question with that tone. It wasn't curiosity. It was disdain, like he was daring me to say yes so he could laugh in my face. Before I could speak, he added, "You run some reports, automate a few things, but value, that's not the same as impact." I looked at him stunned. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. He didn't see me. Not really. To him, I was a cog, replaceable, invisible. So I did the only thing I could. I stayed silent. I smiled politely. I nodded, and I walked out of his office without saying a single word. But I knew something he didn't. I wasn't going to beg to be seen. I was going to make myself impossible to ignore. After I walked out of Grant's office, I sat at my desk for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at my screen, letting his words echo in my mind. "Do you really think you deserve a higher salary?" It wasn't just a question. It was a dismissal of my work, my value, my presence. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd reconsider, that after cooling off he'd reach out. A follow-up, an apology even. But instead, I got an email from HR the next morning. Subject line, Departmental Realignment, Data Team. It was short, dry, informing me that I was being reassigned to a cross-functional innovation team, and that all of my current projects would be handed over to Alex. Yes, that Alex, the one I trained, the one who thought pivot tables were magic. I read it 3 times, then forwarded it to myself, just in case. At first, I tried to stay calm. Maybe this was temporary, maybe they just needed to shuffle things around. But by the end of the week, it was clear I was being sidelined. Completely. Access to my dashboards? Revoked. Permissions to edit key datasets? Gone. I couldn't even run the scripts I'd written without submitting a formal request. The systems I built, my systems, were now in the hands of people who didn't even understand how they worked. Worse than that, I could feel the shift in the air. People stopped looping me into meetings. Slack channels went silent when I logged in. One teammate even messaged me privately. "Hey Zoe, just a heads up, Grant said not to rely on you for the Q4 analytics. He wants everything going through Alex now. I replied with a thumbs up emoji. That night, I sat on my couch, laptop open, screen glowing. I looked through every line of code I had written over the years. The data models, the automation triggers, the integrations with our product usage logs, our CRM, our forecasting tools. It wasn't pride I felt, it was betrayal. They weren't just pushing me out, they were taking what I built and pretending it had nothing to do with me. Grant hadn't just disrespected me in that meeting. He was erasing me. And yet, I stayed quiet. I didn't protest. I didn't go to HR. I didn't even tell my closest coworker, Nina, who'd been with me since the early days. I just watched. And while I watched, I noticed something else. The new team, Alex and his crew, had no idea what they were doing. Reports were late. Forecasts were inaccurate. One of the client dashboards showed last year's data as current, but no one said a word. Not publicly, at least. Then came the kicker. During a weekly all-hands, Grant stood on stage and praised the fresh direction of the data team. He smiled, arms wide, and said, "This is what happens when we put the right people in charge." The room clapped. I didn't. I sat there, hands folded, heart pounding. That night, I opened a private server on my old personal laptop, the one I used back when the company was just a scrappy startup and everything ran on Google Sheets and caffeine. I made a copy of everything I still had access to. Not to sabotage, not yet, but because I knew something no one else in that room seemed to understand. I wasn't disposable. And this story wasn't over. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in my own company. My badge still worked, my desk was still there, my name was still listed in the company directory, but it might as well have been carved into a tombstone. The cross-functional innovation team turned out to be a smokescreen. It wasn't a team at all. It was me, alone, assigned to vague initiatives no one cared about. Tasks like research future tools or benchmark industry trends. No clear goals, no metrics, no meetings, just isolation. Meanwhile, Alex was floundering. I watched from the sidelines as he botched simple report queries and confused engagement metrics with conversion data. One time, he presented a chart that implied our churn rate was negative. No one questioned it, or if they did, they kept quiet. Because Grant had spoken, and when Grant made a decision, people either nodded or disappeared. One Friday afternoon, I got an email from Nina. Subject, "You okay?" She didn't say much, just that the office felt weird without me in the room, and that something smelled off about the whole thing. I wanted to tell her everything, but I didn't. I couldn't risk dragging her down with me. Besides, I had already started noticing a shift. A project I built, our quarterly customer retention dashboard, was malfunctioning. The numbers didn't match. The visualizations were broken. I knew exactly what was wrong. It was a small code dependency they hadn't updated when we changed CRM vendors. It would have taken me 30 minutes to fix, but no one asked. Instead, Grant sent a company-wide email. "We're experiencing technical difficulties with our reporting tools. Our new data team is working tirelessly to resolve the issue. Appreciate your patience." Our new data team. I stared at that line for a long time. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a statement. A rewrite of history, like I had never existed. Then came the moment that truly broke me. I got called into a performance review with HR. Not Grant this time. Just a polite woman from People Ops and a neutral third-party consultant who kept repeating phrases like alignment and team cohesion. They asked me how I felt about my role. I told them I felt discarded. They smiled sympathetically and nodded, then handed me a document outlining a PIP, Performance Improvement Plan. 3 vague goals, 2 check-ins, 1 final review in 30 days. I knew what it was. Everyone in tech knows what a PIP means. It means they've already decided to fire you. They just need you to sign the paperwork to make it clean. I walked out of that room feeling hollow. Not angry, not sad, just numb. I went home that night and sat in the dark for a long time. My laptop glowed faintly on the coffee table. Notifications blinked, messages went unread. I kept thinking about something Grant said in that first meeting. Value isn't the same as impact. It echoed differently now. Because here's what I realized. They were still using everything I built. The automation systems, the API integrations, the data warehouse queries, even the presentation templates. They had stripped my name from the files, changed the owners in the system, But the fingerprints were still mine. They were relying on a skeleton I had constructed with 4 years of sweat and silence, and that skeleton was about to collapse. That weekend, I drove out to my sister's cabin 2 hours outside the city. No signal. No internet. Just me, a notebook, and a decision. I spent the night drawing diagrams. Every system I had touched, every tool I had configured, every access point they had forgotten to revoke. There were many, because in their rush to erase me, they had forgotten something. You can't erase what you don't understand. They thought taking away my job would make me powerless. They thought silence meant surrender. They were wrong. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. But I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story. If they were going to erase me, they were going to find out what happened when the invisible engine stopped running. Not with a scream, but with a single precise keystroke. When I returned to the office the following Monday, I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't smile. I didn't ask questions or push back on the pip. I played my part. Silent, cooperative, invisible. But inside, everything had shifted. I had spent the weekend mapping every point of failure in the systems I built, every single dependency, every integration, every scheduled task. Most of it was still functioning because no one had dared to fully remove my code. They couldn't. It was too embedded, too essential. But here's the thing. They also hadn't maintained it. They assumed it would keep running, like magic, like I had built something eternal. But systems, especially ones that automate critical data pipelines, are like living organisms. They need upkeep, calibration, and understanding, and no one left in that building understood them. Not really. So I started making small moves. First, I logged into the legacy admin console, one that predated our fancy new single sign-on setup. It was still live, still tied to my credentials. I didn't touch anything yet. I just confirmed I had access. Then I checked the API tokens. Most had expiration dates, but one key hadn't been rotated in over 2 years. It was connected to our financial dashboard, the one our investors viewed during quarterly updates. Still active, still mine. I created a clone environment on an encrypted drive and began copying configurations. I didn't alter any production data. That would have been obvious. But I took snapshots, logs, dependencies. A mirror of the system no one knew I still controlled. Then, the most important move, I documented everything. Every flaw I had previously flagged and been ignored. Every error they had failed to fix. Every message, every Slack thread, every email that proved I had tried to warn them. And I saved it all, on a private, time-stamped, read-only archive, not for revenge, for protection. Because I knew what was coming. That Friday, Alex held a meeting to update leadership on the state of our data systems. I was invited as a courtesy, I suppose. Or maybe they wanted me to watch him fumble. Either way, I sat in the back, quiet, listening. He clicked through slides full of vague insights and pretty charts, but the numbers were off. The engagement rate had inexplicably doubled, and no one could explain why. The churn data looked wrong, and when Grant asked a question about source accuracy, Alex just smiled and said, "We're still refining the metrics. You know how legacy systems are." I almost laughed. Legacy systems. That was me. After the meeting, Grant passed me in the hallway. He didn't even look at me. But I looked at him. And in that moment, I realized something. He thought he had won. He thought I was out of the picture, reduced to a quiet footnote. But I still held the foundation of everything. The system may have looked stable from the outside, but it was teetering. One wrong input, one missed maintenance update, one trigger left unattended, and it would all begin to crumble. And I wouldn't have to lift a finger. I just had to wait. Let them ignore the warning signs. Let them underestimate me. Because sometimes the most devastating moves aren't the ones you make loudly. They're the ones you prepare in silence. It started with an email. Not to me, of course. I was only CC'd, probably by accident. The subject line read, "Urgent, missing data in quarterly report." I opened it slowly, pretending not to care, but every word was familiar. The data in question? Our customer retention pipeline. The one I had built 2 years ago. The same one Alex had presented, incorrectly, just a week earlier. According to the message, the system hadn't updated in over 6 days. The automation had failed silently, pushing outdated numbers into our executive dashboard. The Q4 churn rate being reported to our investors was off by nearly 12%. And the demo with investors? It was scheduled for the next day. I sat back, watching the flurry unfold. Emails, pings, requests. IT was asked to check the sync schedules. Alex was reviewing the code. Grant sent a terse message to the data team, "Fix this. Now." But I knew they wouldn't fix it, because the issue wasn't a broken script. It wasn't a server outage. It was entropy. Everything I had built had layers, conditions, dependencies, checks and balances. It wasn't designed to survive neglect. And they had neglected it. By noon, panic was setting in. People were pacing. Alex was locked in a meeting room with his laptop, sweating through his collar. I saw Nina outside the glass door, biting her lip. She caught my eye briefly but didn't say anything. Then, just after 3 p.m., the main dashboard went down completely. Not a glitch. A full crash. The real-time reports for marketing, product, customer success, all of them blank. Our web app was still up, but the insights? Gone. Every metric the leadership team depended on had vanished. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Grant had invited 2 potential Series B investors to a private demo session that afternoon. They were already in the building. One of them, I recognized, Daniel Tran from Altara Ventures. He was known to be meticulous. He'd walk away from a deal if even one number didn't add up, and none of our numbers were adding up. I watched the scene unfold like theater. Alex stumbling through excuses, Grant snapping at interns, someone actually running down the hallway with a spare monitor. I received a Slack ping from someone on the data team. "Hey Zoe, sorry to bug you. Any chance you know why the retention pipeline failed?" I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, another message. "Zoe, can you jump on a call really quick? It's chaos in here." Still nothing. Then, a direct email from Grant. Subject, "Need your help. Critical situation." He didn't even say hello. Just, "Zoe, we need your assistance restoring the dashboards. We understand you were the original architect and may have insights. Let's discuss compensation if needed." I sat with that email for a long time, not because I needed time to think, but because I wanted him to sweat. Eventually I replied, "Happy to help, but only in writing, and only if full system ownership is formally restored under my name, effective immediately. Otherwise, I'm not liable for what happens next." There was no reply. Instead, I received a calendar invite. Emergency meeting with execs, 5 p.m. I joined late on purpose. When I entered the video call, the room was dead silent. Grant looked tired. Alex wouldn't meet my eyes. I shared my screen and calmly walked them through what was happening. The outdated API token that should have been rotated. The automation job that had a known expiry date. The error logs I had flagged months ago, ignored. And the most critical piece, a single missing dependency package that caused the entire reporting framework to collapse. Grant tried to interrupt. I spoke over him. "This system didn't fail because I left," I said. "It failed because you assumed it would work without me." Then I pulled up the access logs. "You didn't even revoke my admin credentials. That's how little you understood what I built." Silence. Daniel Tran, the investor, leaned forward. "So, who's responsible for the data integrity here?" No one answered. He closed his notebook, stood up, and said, "Thanks for your time. I've seen enough." That was it. The deal was dead. The room stayed frozen as the Zoom call ended. I logged off. Not with a smile, not with gloating, just clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was reality catching up. They thought I was gone. They thought I was irrelevant. But I had only been silent. And sometimes silence is just the sound of someone sharpening a blade. By Monday morning, the news had already spread. The Series B deal was off the table. Daniel Tran's team had sent a polite but firm email withdrawing interest due to critical concerns over data reliability and leadership transparency. In startup terms, that was a death sentence. Grant tried to control the narrative. He sent out a long-winded message to the company. "We encountered unexpected technical challenges during a key investor session. We're conducting a full review of our infrastructure to ensure long-term resilience." No one believed him. Whispers started circulating almost immediately. People asked questions. Why hadn't anyone fixed the failing systems? Why was the original architect, me, excluded from the process? Why were we relying on half-baked dashboards built by someone who didn't even understand our data stack? Nina sent me a one-line message. "They're turning on him." And they were. The leadership team, once loyal to Grant, began quietly distancing themselves. 2 VPs canceled their weekly check-ins. HR launched a formal culture audit. Someone leaked internal emails showing that Grant had rejected multiple warnings from engineering, my warnings. But the final blow came from the board. 3 days after the failed demo, an emergency meeting was called. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. By the end of the day, Grant was gone. Officially, it was framed as a transition. Unofficially, he was fired, escorted out of the building by security, according to Nina. No goodbye speech, no farewell party, just silence and the sound of his empire collapsing behind him. The next morning, I received an email from the interim CEO. It was short, professional, and, most shockingly, respectful. Zoe, I understand the events of the past few weeks have been difficult. I'd like to speak with you directly about restoring your role, your systems, and your voice in this company. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it, because here's the truth. I didn't want my old job back. I didn't want to return to the same desk, same title, same silence. What I wanted was recognition, not just a promotion or a paycheck, but an acknowledgement that what I built mattered. That I mattered. Eventually, I agreed to the meeting. I laid out my terms, full ownership of the data architecture, with decision-making authority. A new title, Director of Data Integrity and Infrastructure. Back pay for the months I'd been overlooked. A written apology, not for me, but to be sent company-wide, recognizing the contributions of people like me who had been dismissed or ignored. To my surprise, they said yes. Every word. And that was how, without yelling, without threats, without revenge, I won. Not with fire, but with structure, patience, and undeniable truth. They tried to erase me. But in the end, the company couldn't function without me. And when the dust settled, I was still standing. Quiet, but visible. By Monday morning, the news had already spread. The Series B deal was off the table. Daniel Tran's team had sent a polite but firm email withdrawing interest due to critical concerns over data reliability and leadership transparency. In startup terms, that was a death sentence. Grant tried to control the narrative. He sent out a long-winded message to the company. We encountered unexpected technical challenges during a key investor session. We're conducting a full review of our infrastructure to ensure long-term resilience. No one believed him. Whispers started circulating almost immediately. People asked questions. Why hadn't anyone fixed the failing systems? Why was the original architect, me, excluded from the process? Why were we relying on half-baked dashboards built by someone who didn't even understand our data stack? Nina sent me a one-line message. They're turning on him. And they were. The leadership team, once loyal to Grant, began quietly distancing themselves. 2 VPs canceled their weekly check-ins. HR launched a formal culture audit. Someone leaked internal emails showing that Grant had rejected multiple warnings from engineering, my warnings. But the final blow came from the board. 3 days after the failed demo, an emergency meeting was called. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. By the end of the day, Grant was gone. Officially, it was framed as a transition. Unofficially, he was fired, escorted out of the building by security, according to Nina. No goodbye speech, no farewell party. Just silence and the sound of his empire collapsing behind him. The next morning, I received an email from the interim CEO. It was short, professional, and most shockingly respectful. Zoe, I understand the events of the past few weeks have been difficult. I'd like to speak with you directly about restoring your role, your systems, and your voice in this company. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it. Because here's the truth. I didn't want my old job back. I didn't want to return to the same desk, same title, same silence. What I wanted was recognition. Not just a promotion or a paycheck, but an acknowledgement that what I built mattered. That I mattered. Eventually, I agreed to the meeting. I laid out my terms, full ownership of the data architecture with decision-making authority. A new title, Director of Data Integrity and Infrastructure. Back pay for the months I'd been overlooked. A written apology, not for me, but to be sent company-wide, recognizing the contributions of people like me who had been dismissed or ignored. To my surprise, they said yes. Every word. And that was how, without yelling, without threats, without revenge, I won. Not with fire, but with structure, patience, and undeniable truth. They tried to erase me. But in the end, the company couldn't function without me. And when the dust settled, I was still standing. Quiet, but visible. Finally, 3 weeks later, I received an invitation I hadn't expected. It was for a panel discussion titled Women in Tech, Building What No One Sees, hosted by one of our former investors. I almost declined. I wasn't a speaker, I wasn't flashy, I didn't like microphones or spotlights, but something in the title hit me. Building What No One Sees. That had been my life. So I went. I didn't dress up. I wore black jeans and a simple blazer. I sat in the third row, blending in with the crowd. The panelists spoke about visibility, equity, and recognition, about how women in tech are often expected to do the invisible work, then punished for not being loud about it. At the end, the moderator opened the floor to the audience. Someone in the back stood up and asked, "Can you give an example of a time when someone's quiet work saved a company?" One of the panelists smiled and said, "Actually, yes. There was a case recently, company in Denver. The lead data architect was sidelined. Leadership thought they could replace her without understanding what she'd built. The whole system fell apart. They lost a funding round. The CEO got fired. And the woman? She rebuilt the company from the ashes." The room murmured. No names were mentioned. But I felt every eye turned toward me. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I just smiled. Because here's the twist no one knew. While Grant was being escorted out that day, a file had been quietly forwarded to several media outlets, a timeline of the system collapse, with attached logs, Slack messages, and internal memos. It didn't name names, but it told a clear story. A story about ego, about dismissal, about the cost of underestimating someone who builds in silence. And it had gone viral on LinkedIn. Tens of thousands of shares. Comments from engineers, analysts, and quiet workers around the world. People writing, "This happened to me, I'm Zoe." I didn't post it, but I didn't stop it either. That story had a life of its own now. So, when people ask how I got promoted, how I ended up rebuilding the department on my own terms, I don't talk about the data. I talk about silence, about the power of restraint. Because sometimes being loud isn't the only way to lead. Sometimes you win not by raising your voice, but by refusing to let them write you out of the story. And when they ask me if I'd do it all over again, I say this: next time, I wouldn't wait to speak. But if I had to be silent again, yes, I'd make damn sure my silence was loud enough to shake the walls.